Travels and Traditions with Burt is a classic travel journal, a record of Burt's search for information about our world and how we fit into it. Burt travels to the source of each story, trying to find the connections between our history and what is happening today. What he discovers can improve our lives and our understanding of the world around us. And of course, there's always Burt's slightly irreverent sense of humor.
Uh-oh. Oh, my goodness. We're going to need a bigger can. I end up buying and drinking bottled water. Often I find a few bottles of water in my hotel room. Sometimes it's free, and sometimes it's outrageously expensive. Sometimes it's necessary, and sometimes you can drink the tap water and save your money. When I was traveling in the jungles of Guatemala, bringing along bottled water was clearly the right choice. In New York, buying bottled water strikes me as a waste of money. New York tap water is some of the best in the world. Staying hydrated is particularly important for your health, especially when you travel through time zones, which is something I do quite often. So I thought I'd take a look at the history, culture, chemistry, and the future of water. Our Earth is often called the blue planet because so much of it is covered with water. And just about everything that has happened on our planet, and is happening now, involves water. According to most geologists, life on Earth began about 3.5 million years ago, and it got started in water. Life exists wherever there is water, and it is absent in places without water. One of the driest places on Earth is the Atacama Desert in Chile. A few years ago, we were filming there, and we were all struck by the almost total absence of life, which of course did not include our crew. Throughout our planet, water shows up at different temperatures, and life adjusts to those varied conditions. In Antarctica, water presents itself in giant fields of ice. Male emperor penguins spend 2 months sitting on penguin eggs. During those 2 months, temperatures can drop to 40 degrees below zero, and the winds zip along at about 125 miles an hour. The penguins have developed a deep layer of fat and a thick coat of feathers, kind of like the Russian oligarchs. They huddle together for warmth. They've learned to deal with water as ice. Along a series of cracks in the ocean floor, water that has been heated by molten rock steams out at about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Clustered around the cracks are worms that seem to have developed a heat-resistant coat. They've learned to deal with water's ability to hold heat. It's generally agreed that Jesus spoke an ancient language known as Aramaic. In Aramaic, the word Eden translates as the place with lots of water. No wonder Adam and Eve hung out in the Garden of Eden. Alongside its role as the source of existence, water has been revered by every religion. It stands as a sacred symbol of purification and the gift of life. Each year, millions of pilgrims visit the holy sites on the Ganges River in India. There are many stories about the origin of the Ganges. My favorite tells of the Lord Shiva asking the goddess Ganga to save the planet from a devastating drought. The goddess says, "Sure, glad to help." But she warns Shiva that if she arrives with all her strength, her power will destroy the planet. So Lord Shiva arranges to have the water descend to Earth through his hair, and that water is the Ganges River. Water is used throughout the Christian church for baptism, which is the sacrament of admission and the adoption into the church. When the baptism is for a child, it's called a christening. There is a considerable amount of evidence that Jesus was baptized. In Judaism, ritual washing with water is described in the Old Testament Bible. It has been part of the religion for thousands of years. And ceremonial washing with water is a basic part of Islamic culture. My mother told me that when I was a baby, the first word I said was down, as I pointed to the nearby ocean. I wanted to be in the water. By the time I was 6, I was in a sailing class, and I've been a devoted sailor ever since. At one point, I attended a survival class for ocean sailors and learned not to drink seawater. By weight, seawater is about 3.5% salt. Drinking seawater will only dehydrate you and make you thirstier. A water molecule is minuscule. A single cell can contain billions of water molecules. Each molecule consists of 3 atoms, 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogen. Water molecules cling to each other in a process called hydrogen bonding. The bonds are so strong that they create a surface for teeny creatures to walk on. Water exists in 3 forms. As vapor, it exists in clouds and fog and mist. A cloud is a mass of water droplets that has a very short shelf life. They usually last for about an hour. In ice, water exists as a solid. And finally, as a liquid, as in Scotch and water. As a liquid, the water molecules are frenetic. They jump from place to place. But they're also tightly packed together, which makes the water dense. Generally, when a liquid freezes, it becomes more dense. But that's not the case with water. When water freezes, its density is reduced, which is why it floats. As the water turns to ice, the molecules form a crystal structure. The empty spaces in the structure act as a buoyancy device. I hope you realize that the only reason I am in a bar is to illustrate a scientific point. I am now experiencing water in 3 forms. In the liquid form, as you can see on the base, as a solid form in the ice, and as vapor that is forming from the ice as it melts into the water. Scotch is irrelevant. Isn't science wonderful? When water in the atmosphere changes to snow, it goes directly from a gas to a solid, skipping the liquid phase. A snowflake is a 6-pointed star, a glorious thing on the ski slopes of the mountains. A real pain in your driveway. Water soaring up from beneath the earth. The spring has always had a mystical quality, offering an opportunity to be cleansed and rejuvenated. It's an ancient and universal symbol of life and rebirth. In general, you can live for a couple of months without food, but a couple of weeks without water, and you're on your way out. So when someone discovered a place where clean, fresh, drinkable water just came up out of the ground, they honored that spot. Ancient civilizations, including the Greeks, planted gardens and built shrines around the springs. When the builders started to use basins and reservoirs to display and transport the waters, the springs became fountains. The Romans developed a purely decorative form of fountain that eventually ended up as a monumental sculpture. The early Christians placed fountains in their basilicas as a symbol and a source of purification. During the Middle Ages, the fountains moved into the courtyards of the monasteries. But it was in Italy during the Renaissance that the fountain took on a form that was dominated by staggering, immense, virtually gargantuan sculptures. And Rome is the place with the most extraordinary examples of this art. The ancient Romans were great at building fountains that they filled with water. But they were also highly skilled at designing and building the structures that brought the water from the natural springs to the fountains. One of my favorite examples is the Pont de Gard in the southwest of France. People have been living in this area for thousands of years, but in the year 120 they became citizens of the Roman Empire. The big town in the neighborhood was Nîmes, and 50,000 people lived in it, which meant they needed 40,000 cubic meters of water every day. Roman architects solved the problem by building an aqueduct that came from this spring to the center of town. Spring was always filled with water, because it rains a lot. In about the year 50 AD, Roman architects began building an aqueduct to bring water from the mountains to the city of Nîmes. It was an impressive structure that ran for almost 30 miles, and the most spectacular part was the span over the Pont de Gard. Even today, it attracts thousands of tourists. It illustrates the high level of architectural skill possessed by the ancient Romans. Pont de Gard passes over the normally quiet Gardon River at the bottom of a deep valley, but from time to time the Gardon floods, and the water crashes against the pillars that hold up the bridge. In order to protect the structure against these destructive currents, the Roman architects shaped the pillars like the prow of a ship. Smart guys. The walls of the canal were waterproof with a type of plaster that was made from a mixture of lime, pork fat, wine, and figs. Salt and pepper was added to taste. It was so effective that 2,000 years later, it can still be found on parts of the aqueduct. Much of the primary work for the construction was done at the stone quarry. Each stone was cut to a particular size and shape, then lettered to indicate which arch it was for, and numbered to show the workman where it was to be placed in the arch. Not quite a kit from IKEA, but getting close. The most famous water in the Western world is probably the water from the shrine at Lourdes. The ancient village of Lourdes in the southwest corner of France is one of the most important shrines in the Christian world. Set in a valley in the Pyrenees Mountains along the border with Spain, it is a sanctuary that has become famous as a place where the sick are healed. Each year, over 6 million people come to Lourdes, and they come from all over the world. As a holy site, Lourdes is relatively new. It was recognized by the church in 1862, but since then, thousands of cures have been examined and documented. Ill people of many different faiths come here in the hope of curing their ailments or assisting in the cures of others. Most people come here to be in a holy atmosphere and feel close to God, to reconcile different elements and conflicts in their lives, to renew friendships, and to find strength. On February 11, 1858, Bernadette Subaru, her sister, and a friend set out to gather wood for a cooking fire. They had to avoid any place where they might be accused of stealing the wood, so they walked along the local riverbed, which was considered to be common property. Bernadette sat down on a sandy area near an outcropping of rocks. At the base was a small grotto. She heard the wind but saw nothing. Then from a corner of the grotto, she saw a soft light that surrounded a beautiful young lady in white. The lady smiled at Bernadette and motioned her to come near. Bernadette instinctively reached for her rosary, but was unable to grasp it until the lady produced her own and made the sign of the cross. Nothing was said by Bernadette or the young lady. This was the first of 18 apparitions of the Virgin Mary that the 14-year-old Bernadette would see over the next 5 months. At each visit to the grotto, Bernadette was accompanied by a growing number of witnesses. During the 10th apparition, over 800 people from the surrounding villages came to the site, and on March 3rd, the crowd had grown to over 7,000. The apparitions were bringing all ranks of society together in one place and creating a collective sense of spirituality. Historically, visions have occurred in places that were private, without any witnesses. But Bernadette's experience was completely different. Though she was the only one to see the vision in white, thousands of people saw her during the encounter. Something about the way she was standing, the sincerity of her tears, the quality of the experience convinced people that what she was seeing was true. During Bernadette's 9th vision at the grotto, the lady in white showed Bernadette a hidden stream that was to become an essential element for the pilgrims traveling to Lourdes. At first, there was only a trickle of muddy water in a place where there had never been any. Today, the fountain pours out millions of gallons of water a year, water that is considered to have the ability to heal the devout. The vision also sent Bernadette to the local priests with a request that they come to the grotto in procession and build a chapel. Today, the sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes is made up of the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary, the crypt, the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, the Basilica of St. Pius X, the Church of St. Bernadette, and the grotto.
Je vous salue Marie, pleine de grâce, le Seigneur est avec vous. Vous êtes bénie entre toutes les femmes, et Jésus, le fruit de vos entrailles, est béni. Sainte Marie, Mère de Dieu, priez pour nous pauvres pécheurs.
Each morning, a Mass is held at the grotto. Behind the altar is a box where you can leave your written prayer or request. Pilgrims touch the rock as they pass through the grotto. It's a sign of their belief that only God is the rock on which they can build their lives. At the back of the grotto is the spring that was discovered by Bernadette. Its water is piped to the taps to the left of the grotto. To drink some of the water or take some home is a sign of your faith in the power of God. Pilgrims wash their faces and ask God to purify their hearts. Just to the side of the taps is an area where candles are sold. The candles remind pilgrims that at one point, Bernadette came to meet the vision with a lighted candle in her hand. And each year, millions of pilgrims repeat Bernadette's activities. From time to time, there is a lack of space, and you will not be able to immediately offer your lighted candle. Candlemen may invite you to hold your lighted candle while you make your prayer, then extinguish it and place it into a box near the grotto. During the winter months, when there are fewer pilgrims, these candles will be relit and your prayer prolonged during your absence. The candle is also a reminder that Jesus once described himself as the light of the world. For thousands of years, the inhabitants of the area were mountain people, isolated from their neighbors and living in close touch with nature and the supernatural world. Many people believe that the Virgin Mary chose to appear to Bernadette because she represented a world that was pure, unspoiled by a desire for material objects and the secularism of the government. The fact that she lived in the mountains of the Pyrenees only enhanced her story. The town was right next to the roads used by pilgrims to get to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And since the Middle Ages, the locals were well aware of the Virgin Mary and her special relationship to miracles. The spiritual world was very much part of their life, and there had been a long tradition of specific trees, bushes, and rivers being able to intercede with the Christian saints. That Bernadette was walking along the bank of a river when she discovered the grotto and was shown the secret of a spring underlying the ancient relationship of water, the supernatural, and the rite of baptism. In 1883, the Medical Bureau of Lourdes was established. The objective was to use modern medical techniques to distinguish between real cures and false claims. The Bureau investigates each report in order to establish the true facts. It records the details of all cures. The doctors here have no interest in confirming the success of the supernatural. But it is clear that people have been recovering from their illnesses without medical attention. Since 1858, there have been over 5,000 documented healings and 66 cures that have been recognized as miracles. Scientists are now fully aware of the fact that our brains have the ability to control the chemistry of our bodies. And these changes can be essential for a person's well-being and a patient's recovery. The central element here is that if you believe that you are going to recover, then your chances of recovery are considerably greater. Scientists have proven this with the use of medicines and placebos. They have also shown that your mind can exercise its power over your body without some tangible tool like medicine. But what if the belief in your recovery is not based on a pill or your relationship to a doctor, but on your belief in the power of God? What scientists have found is that the same chemical changes that are induced by your belief in your doctor or your medicine are virtually the same chemical changes that can be produced by your belief in the power of God acting within you in answer to your prayers. You can take a look at the history of the people who have been cured at Lourdes and the millions of visitors who come here each year and think miracles produce faith. But in fact, it's just the opposite. Faith produces miracles. For Travels and Traditions, I'm Burt Wolfe.
Play it again, Sam, for old time's sake.
You must remember this.
Good idea. If you'd like to see this program again, or any of the hundreds of programs we've made for our public broadcasting stations, or see the material that was great, but we couldn't fit it into the program, you can see it all on BurtWolfe.com or YouTube Burt Wolfe. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.